Shalom, shalom. Welcome back to the end, revealed out of the beginning. We are continuing our discussion for these next few more programs on the paradigm or the model of Esau and the anti-Messiah and so forth. And when we left off last time, we were in the parable of the sower, which I brought up several times concerning this issue. And we've taken the first three soils, and the words that are used there are directly out of the lives of Cain, Ishmael, and Esau, which we just showed. The birds and so forth, and the stony places that won't produce any fruit and so forth, and won't produce anything. And then we had the thorns, the third soil that, if you will, in the end rejected the seed, was the one that was the thorns and the thistles came up and so forth. And then we took that back to the result of Adam's exile in the very beginning. But you also have to keep in mind that, once again, the Father has multitudinous ways of his seed being revealed to everyone. One of the main points of the parable of the four soils and the sower is that everyone has had an opportunity to see this. And God has, because He loves the whole world, He has all kinds of ways to do this. Don't put Him into your little bitty Greek thinking box and think that it's only this way that people can hear about Yeshua the Messiah. The Father's in control of this. He's the sower. That's why it says the Son of Man sowed the good seed. He knows exactly where He put them. He knows how He did it. And He gives us the responsibility to speak forth and do everything He tells us to do. But the Father's not limited to you and me. He's not limited to you and me. He is an all-powerful God and Creator. And so when you hear all the little things about, well, what about the guy on the island that never got to hear about it? The Father's the sower. The Father's the sower. And if you're really worried about the guy on the island, then go buy a bus ticket. Get to the airport, get on a plane, go to the island, and deal with it. If you know there's a guy on an island who doesn't know, you're kind of being irresponsible by just scratching your head going, what about him? If you know there's one, of course it's hypothetical anyway, then get over there and do something about it. My point is, the Father and the Son of Man sowed the good seed, and according to this, and for an example like Romans chapter 1 verse 20 that we read earlier, which says, for the invisible things of Him from the creation of the world. From when? The middle? No, the beginning. The invisible things of Him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, clearly the English uses there, and understood by the things which are made, even His Godhead, so they are without excuse. So He pours out His seed into all the four kinds of soil. Why does it have four kinds of soil? Because of the north, the south, the east, and the west. It's one of the main reasons. In other words, all of it, the whole earth. It's one of the major reasons why you have four gospels. And you have four levels of interpretation of understanding the Scripture, because when you gather in all four, it's God's way of saying you understand it all. And so the first three soils are identified in the lives of Cain, Ishmael, and Ezav. When we get to the fourth soil, of course, that's the one that's going to receive it, and they're going to produce fruit, as we talked about earlier, after Abraham's seed. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So I want to focus for a little bit now on this program on the thorns, and we'll probably continue on into the next one. Because when you when you go back to the beginning and see the thorns, you're going to see they're going to be used consistently from Genesis to Revelation. If I can take the time, if you can bring this up, Kyle. This is a quote from it's a Talmudic quote. So in other words, Talmudic quote. I mean, it's from the Talmud. It's not from the Scriptures. It's by Rabbi Levi and his commentary on the parsha, a section of our parsha called Toledot, or generations. Here's the quote. It says, Jacob as a blacksmith who once saw bundles of thorns. Now, he specifically had the name of the blacksmith be Jacob. I'm quoting this to you because I want you to see the insight of the rabbis as well. He says the bundles of thorns, the metaphor of Esau is the thorns. Who do you think the blacksmith is? Jacob. Being brought into the city, understanding this to be a sign of pending ruination. Ruination is a hard word to say. A wise man, seeing the smith's concern, said to him, who do you think the wise man is? Are you afraid of these thorns? One spark from your forge and the thorns will be set afire. Now remember earlier, come on back to me, Kyle. Remember earlier that I quoted you from Obadiah chapter 18, and that who is the one that's going to destroy Esau as stubble and cause them to be burned up? The house of Jacob and the house of Joseph, it says. Now, bring this one up too. Kyle, bring it on up, thanks. Bamidbar, Numbers chapter 33, verse 55. Listen to what this already told us in the beginning in the book of Numbers in the Torah. But if you will not drive out the inhabitants of the land from before you, then it shall come to pass that those which let remain of them shall be pricks in your eyes and thorns in your sides, and shall vex you in the land where ye dwell. Now come on back to me, Kyle. Now, what he's saying here, let's get back to the history and get back to the context of it. Israel comes out, the children of Israel, and we're going to talk about who they are a little bit later, come out of the land of Egypt. And the Father knows that there are going to be thorns among them. So in other words, the parable that Yeshua is telling in the New Testament is the Creator God of the universe. This is a parable that has to do from the beginning to the end, not just from Yeshua on. There's always been thorns among the wheat. And so he's saying, when you come into the land, you need to drive the thorns out. Who are the thorns? Well, they live in the land, and they're also going to be mixed among you. And we're going to talk about where that's at in just a little bit. And so drive them out, because if you don't, they will be. If you don't drive these guys out who are against you, then they will be thorns in your sides, and shall vex you in the land wherein you dwell. So my point in bringing this up is that the thorns have already been identified in the beginning. That's another reason why the testimony of Yeshua, which I believe Paul said he was following, is the spirit of prophecy, meaning it's already been prophesied before. Now, we also know that when we get to the parable of the wheat and the tares, Yeshua, the disciples come to Yeshua and says, shall we go into the field and rip up the tares? You remember Yeshua says, don't do that. Why does he say do not do that? Because he knows the end from the beginning. He's smarter than we are. He already knows. I submit to you that Yeshua and the Father already know that for the next 2,000 years, up until the time we live right now, the wheat are not going to follow his ways. Oh, they're going to plant the seeds and everybody, but the Torah, the fruit, is going to be rejected. And for the most part, that has been the dominant teaching of Western religions for 2,000 years, is that Yeshua died on the tree, if you will, to free us from the Torah. Free us from the fruit. So, and the fruit is what the wheat produces. So the Father already knows his own people are not going to produce his fruit. And so if they don't produce his fruit, if the wheat does not produce fruit, then in a field of tares, it looks just like the tares. But he also, so in other words, he's saying, if you rip up the tares, since you can't tell the difference because the other one's not producing my fruit, then you're going to rip up the wheat with it. Don't do that. Wait till the end of days. Because in the end of days, the Father already knows that a remnant of people are going to rise up in the latter days. I believe that's happening right now before our very eyes. A remnant of people are going to rise up. It's always been a remnant, gang. And they're going to say, we are going to go back to our roots. We are going to restore what has been taken away or corrupted. We are going to go back to the fathers. We're going to turn our hearts back to the hearts of the fathers. We're going to restore his ways in the latter days. And then the wheat's going to start producing fruit again. And it will be so easy to tell the difference in the latter days right now between the wheat and the tares. The dividing line, my friends, is going to be greater and greater and greater. We're going to see such a much more demonstrative presence or difference between wheat and tares in the last days. Forgive me for coughing again. I'm still struggling with this little cold. Okay, now, so The bottom line being, don't rip them up. In the latter days, there will be a difference between the wheat and the tares, and you'll be able to see them. Now, with that in mind, let's go back to Numbers when he says that if you do not drive these guys out. Well, I thought we just learned from the parable that Yeshua told that he doesn't want them to rip them up. He didn't. Because when you read the book of Numbers, that was the Father's intention, his desire. Take them out from among you. Remove those guys. Rip those tares up. But he says, you did not. In Numbers chapter 33. Kyle, can you bring it up again? Let's see this verse again. He says, but if you will not drive out the inhabitants of the land, that's what he wanted them to do, then they will be thorns in your sides and vex you in the land we're in. The reason why I have the word vex there is zarar. Zarar, you see it in parentheses there. Can you see the English word vex? The word zarar is the Hebrew word. That happens to be the root of the Hebrew word zara, which is translated as trouble. As in Jacob's trouble. In the last days, there will be what we call Jacob's trouble. And this is already revealed in this agricultural picture of these people who you did not drive out when I told you to do it. And now he knows ahead of time that they're going to be pricks in your eyes and thorns in your sides, and they shall trouble you, if you will. It's just translated as vex here. In the land wherein you dwell. The Bible calls that prophetically the day of Jacob's trouble. So now when they get into the land in Joshua chapter 23 verse 13, because they didn't do it, now listen to what the Father says. Know for a certainty that Yahweh your God will no more drive out any of these nations from before you. What he's trying to say is if you would have just done this, it would have actually been me that would have done it. If you would have been obedient to me and follow me and not allowed these things to be in your midst, I would have actually been the one that would have been behind you. I would have been your king. I would have led you in driving these out from before you. But since you did not, they will be snares and traps unto you, scourges. Notice that's based upon the root set again, the god of the Hyksos. Scourges in your sides, thorns in your eyes, thorns in your flesh. He describes it in your eyes and in your flesh, until you perish from off this good land which Yahweh your God has given you. Kyle, come on back to me. So once again, he wanted them to drive them out, but they didn't. And so he says, because of that, I'm not going to drive them out. And so by the time we get to the days of the Messiah, he's saying, well, leave them in the field now. And when it gets to the end of times, the reapers will come and they will gather up the tares first and burn them, and then we'll put the wheat in the barns. And so that's the agricultural picture of what's taking place in the latter days. In 2 Samuel chapter 23, verse 6, Kyle, can we bring that up? It says, but the sons of Belial shall be all of them as thorns thrust away, because they cannot be taken with hands. I want you to see the relationship of the thorns with Belial, the sons of Belial. In Isaiah 32 verse 13, keep it up there for a bit, Kyle. Upon the land of my people shall come up thorns and briars. Remember the prophecy, wherever Israel is, there Ishmael will be, dwelling always in the presence, but in the Hebrew, it's the Hebrew word for face, always in the face of their brethren. Wherever Israel is, there's where Esau will be, there's where the thorns will be. And he says, upon all the houses of joy in the joyous city. In Matthew 7:16, you know this verse as well as I do. You shall know them by their what? Fruit, what they produce. Do men gather grapes of thorns or figs of thistles? If you are gathering thorns, it's because it's a thorn bush. If you're gathering thistles, it's because it's a thistle bush, if you will. In other words, if my seed is in your heart, then thorns are not going to come out. That's the bottom line. Because that's not what you see in the field. When men go gather grapes, it's not grapes of thorns. There's not figs of thistles and so forth. Then when we get to Ivrim, that is Hebrews. That is our English word Hebrews, 6 verse 8. It says, but that which beareth thorns and briars is rejected, and is nigh unto cursing, whose end is to be burned. So I'm giving you some examples where you're going to start to see these thorns and thistles and briars everywhere. Come on back to me for a moment, Kyle, please. You're going to see them all over the scriptures from one end to the other. That's the idea of once you begin to see. That it's not me. Any good teacher of the scriptures should be able to bring out things in the text that it's not just here or there, but you'll begin to see it everywhere, all over the place. It reminds me, if you can humor me for a minute, it reminds me this idea of once you see it everywhere. Once you understand the concept of the dividing of the house of Israel and the house of Israel and the house of Judah, and that's really what he died on the tree for, was to restore those houses back together. Once you see it one place, then all of a sudden you'll start seeing it in all the language from beginning to end. So this concept of once you see it, you can't help but see it. I remember when I was much younger, and I remember being in a doctor's appointment, in a doctor's office. I think this was sometime in the 70s or early 80s or something like that. And I remember sitting in that doctor's office, and there was a group of people clamoring over in the corner, and there was this picture on the wall. This picture was hanging there on the wall. And I remember they were all talking about it, and some of them were laughing and so forth, and I just kind of get curious, well, what's this picture all about on the wall? And so pretty soon I went over and asked them. I said, well, what's the deal with the picture on the wall? And because it was just a picture of some squiggly lines. There were some colorful squiggly lines, horizontally going across this picture. And they said, can't you see it? And I said, can't you see what? Well, can't you see the picture? I said, well, yeah, it's not a very attractive picture. And they said, oh, no. Can't you see that there is the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria, 3 camels and a horse in that picture? I went, what? And I said, yeah, look at it. It's 3-dimensional. It comes right out at you. And I looked at it, and I went, I just see a bunch of squiggly lines. And here's what they said. They said, no, look through the picture. And so I went, contorting myself every way, I couldn't see anything. And then finally one guy says, no, if you get close and you cross your eyes, you can see it. So I walked up to the picture and I went, look at the picture. I go, I'm sorry, I just see squiggly lines and so forth. And so I backed up from the picture, and all of a sudden, Jared, here it comes, right out at me. Some of you have probably seen these pictures. I don't know that they're really popular anymore, but they used to be popular about 20 years ago. The point being is once I saw those 3 ships, those 3 camels and a horse coming right out at me, 3-dimensionally, I could not walk by that picture and not see it anymore. From that point forward, every time that day I walked by that picture, because I think I was in there for some test, I could clearly see it. So once I saw it, I could not help but see it all the time. That was kind of my point. And that's kind of the true with this. Once you see these agricultural pictures, all of a sudden you'll start noting it in all these verses everywhere from beginning to end. Okay, Kyle, bring up the next verse. Continuing our teaching in the thorns and so forth, Ezekiel 28:24 says, and there shall be no more a pricking briar into the house of Israel, nor any grieving thorn of all them that are round about them, that despise them. And they shall know that I am Yahweh Elohim, because there will be a time, come on back to me, Kyle, there will be a time when these things will be removed and no more. And the Father makes that promise to us, that one day he will remove these things. Now, once again, I'm going to submit to you that particularly these tares that are mixed among the wheat, or these thorns, if you want, mixed out in the field with those that are producing fruit, is more indicative of something that pretends to be a believer, pretends to be the wheat. Because as long as the wheat doesn't produce, it can get away with that. As long as the wheat doesn't produce anything, the tares can continue to get away with looking like they are indeed wheat. Remember the 3 letters, the 3 Greek letters in Revelation chapter 13:18. One thing on the outside, another thing on the inside. Remember the goofy picture of the cat mixed among the raccoons and so on and so forth. Pretending to be so. So as long as the wheat doesn't produce, it's going to be like that. They say that they are, but indeed they are not. They say that they're believers, but they're not believers. Another example, bring up the next one, Kyle. Isaiah chapter 5, 5 and 6. And now go. Everybody's familiar with what takes place in Isaiah 5. I will tell you what I will do to my vineyard. See, the Father's actually going to do it. It's the ramifications of sin. I will take away the hedge thereof. He would have protected the vineyard, but they turned from him. He says, and it shall be eaten up, and break down the wall thereof, and it shall be trodden down. I will lay it waste. Remember that word waste? It shall not be pruned or digged, but there shall come up briars and thorns. I will also command the clouds that they rain no rain upon it. Now remember, what's going to come up? Because they turned away, his people turned away from him, all of them did. Briars and thorns are going to come up from amongst them. That's the same thing that happened to Adam when he was exiled out of the garden. He had this nice garden. Come on back to me a minute, Kyle. He had this nice garden that he originally put them into to protect them and keep them safe. And all they had to do in that garden to eat was just be walking around like this, and they were hungry, they'd just go pick something off a tree and eat it. All they had to do when they needed something, this paradisical atmosphere that the Father, the cultivated plant, had designed for them, if they'd have just kept his ways, when they needed to eat something, not only could they just grab it and pull it off a tree or a bush or something, but I guarantee you it tasted a whole lot better than any fruit that we eat today. And that's all they had to do, but they sinned, and so the result is exile out into the thorns and the thistles. And not only that, he says that because of what you have done, by the sweat of the brow of your brow, you shall eat bread. Now that's the Father's way of saying, if you stayed in the garden, all you had to do is walk by it, because it was already completely designed to be eaten in the garden. But now, by the sweat of the brow, you're going to have to eat bread. Bread is something you have to prepare. You have to take a combination of this and put it with this and put it together with this and mix something together in order to make bread. So you got to go out and get a job, if you will. I got to earn the eggs. I got to earn the sugar. I got to earn the flour or the raisins or whatever you put in the bread. Before, all you had to do was pull it off a tree, and not only was it good for you, but it was very good for you. Now you got to work by your sweat of your brow in order to earn it. So the punishment was you're going to have to be out there going through the same heat and floods and catastrophes that the rest of the world has to go through because you refuse to heed the word of God. And so briars and thorns will be among you. Then he also says, and I will have no rain come upon it. Remember what the picture of the rain is. Casting forth Torah. The Torah. You don't want to obey my Torah? Then I will remove it from your midst, and therefore you will not get rain upon your land, and you will not produce. And my friends, most of us know that that's exactly what happened to Israel for a long time. The land was barren. It was not producing any fruit. You've probably heard the quotes from Mark Twain, who went over there in the late 1800s and said, I don't know why anybody would want to live here. It's a barren desert wasteland. But then as soon as the people of God started returning, Israel is restored as a nation in 1948. One of the first things they decided to do with respect to this nation Israel was turn to the peoples, back to the peoples, the pure language, just like he said he would in Zephaniah chapter 3 verse 9. And as soon as the language starts to return, because you can't separate people from words, and people start going back to the language that started all things, we're still not there yet, all of a sudden the land starts to blossom and bloom and produce much fruit again. This is not a coincidence. As the Torah begins to return in the latter days, all of a sudden the land begins to blossom and produce much fruit. That's one of the first things that when I go to Israel and take people with me and we do tours, that's one of the first things that people notice that have never been to the land before, is there are so many places, especially as you come down the Galilee heading toward the Dead Sea, and so places, some of those places up in the northern part of Israel in particular, but even many places in Jerusalem as well. You can see the beautiful foliage, and lots of people commenting on some of the kibbutzes around there, and some of the beautiful flowers and fruit blossoming, and so many pomegranate trees. Seeing pomegranates everywhere. Driving through the fields and seeing the bananas hanging from the trees, wrapped around with the blue bags and so forth. Understanding that the reason why those bananas are wrapped in the blue bags is because Israel has stumbled onto a secret in which they've now produced straight bananas. Israel has managed to figure out how to produce straight bananas. So they put them in those blue bags in order to protect these new straight bananas that they've come up with. Okay, that's not true. Okay, don't go for the straight banana thing. But anyway... they do have blue bags. Anyway, the point being is that all this fruit and vegetation is coming up there because righteous people are coming back to the land. Every time you and I, if we are faithfully following God, His holy people, come back to the land. It's not the tares that's going to cause the land to produce. It's not unbelief that causes the land to produce. It's the believers going to the land, not the unbelievers. It's the believers. I'm going to submit to you that the tares are mixed among the wheat in the parable, but it's also true that there are wheat mixed among the tares. And we'll probably talk a little bit more about what that means later. In the meantime, before our next program, cling to your roots that your days may be long and that you will prosper in everything you set your hand to do. Once again, Shalom Aleichem. We will see you later. Bye.